Another action-packed episode, another 10 awesome games, and the year doesn't look as if it will slow down anytime soon. But let's check what I've prepared for today. Achtung Spitfire is a sequel to Over the Reich, even if it takes place before the events of the first game, and it's also a turn-based strategy, this time covering various air combat battles during World War II. It includes British, German and French planes and covers campaigns for all three of them. But if you complete them all, you can easily create your own custom scenarios with included scenario builder that extends the game's longevity considerably. It uses same, albeit polished engine that the previous title did, so if you played the first, you'll feel right at home in this one. There are numerous different planes for all the sites available, and each and every one of them feels different, if that even makes sense in a strategy. They are so realistically represented in fact that at the time of its release, Achtung Spitfire was also considered to be partly a simulation, which sounds a bit silly now from the perspective of time, but realism is definitely something that cannot be denied to it. And that realism, I'm afraid, comes with a bit of an issue of its own. Since Achtung Spitfire is a computerization of a board game, you can pretty much guess that it's not an easy one, and that the rules are rather complex, with many factors influencing one another. And it's precisely the case. Which would not be an issue if not for the fact that the instructions that came with the game were rather limited and more like a booklet really. Now, it's no biggie today when we can find detailed descriptions of everything online, video reviews, previews and tutorials, but back then it would be a serious detractor from playing. Interestingly enough, the difficulty choice in Achtung Spitfire is the most unique thing about it, because instead of lowering the complexity of the game or lowering the number of enemies when brought down, as it would have worked in most other games, it only changes range of your control. Meaning that at the lowest, when you play as a squad leader, you only have few choices that you can make during encounters, so you won't get overwhelmed with an ocean of options that you'd get playing at the general level. In the end, Achtung Spitfire is an interesting strategy, and if you like those and are into planes and World War II, it's definitely something worth your time. Even today. No, especially today. Claw is a 2D side-scrolling action platformer that twists our 15th century history into its alternate version, where instead of humans, the world is populated by two opposing races of anthropomorphic cats and dogs. You play as Captain Claw, an infamous and notorious handsome cat pirate who, after being caught and imprisoned at La Roca, learns about the mysterious Amulet of 9 Lives, which is said to grant near immortality. So, he breaks out of the prison and sets off to find and recover said magical item. The game will see you going through a series of 14 levels thematically appropriate to the route that you'll take to get to the treasure, and some of them will end with a boss fight. Every one of them though looks and feels different, and the latter ones take rather long to complete, making Claw a pretty sizable adventure. All stages are filled with both environmental hazards like traps, spikes and pits to name a few, and enemies galore, from big to small, all out to get our hero. You have a sword, a pistol with limited ammunition, dynamite and even special magic claw ability however, so you're far from being defenseless. Your mission will not only see you fighting, no, it's a platformer at heart after all. So a good deal of time jumping, hopping all over the moving or disappearing platforms and swinging on vines, ropes and the likes is what you'll be mainly doing. There are also special weapon pickups and hidden levels accessible via warps to spice up the gameplay. The story is told via intermissions, via animated cutscenes, and these are really well made, adding a lot to the atmosphere of it all. Presentation-wise, objectively speaking, Claw is beautiful, sporting high-resolution sprite artwork that moves and animates at super smooth frame rates looking like a cartoon, all on lush and colorful backgrounds. That said, personally I prefer my 2D platformers low-res, cause then they have that undeniable retro charm then, but that's me. And like I said, objectively, Claw looks incredible. Sounds are as good as the graphics, so overall it's an excellent package for any and all fans of the genre. But believe it or not, that's not all. Because the game features built-in level editor that allows for creation of your own stages and even importing of those made by others, extending the playability of Claw near infinitely. Cool, right? And yet, that's still not all. Because Claw keeps on giving, offering numerous multiplayer gameplay modes and even 64 people LAN option, which is just unbelievable if you keep in mind that it was released in 1997. Claw is a true gem and one of the best platformers of its generation. Need for Speed 2 SC is a, well, special edition of the arcade racing game released earlier the very same year. It's basically the same brilliant and addictive racing title as the 2 was, with some tweaks, changes and additions. So, in this extended version, official support for 3DFX acceleration was finally added, making it look extra beautiful on supported hardware, and virtually indistinguishable from the basic game if you did not own it. But such were the days of early acceleration. Even if you didn't own 3DFX card, SE was still worth owning if you were a fan of the game, as it added 4 new cars to pick between for a total of 12. And these are McLaren F1, Ferrari F50, Lotus GT1, Jaguar XJ220, Ford GT90, is there a Commendatore 112i, and yes, that's how it's pronounced, Ital Design Kala, Lotus Esprit V8, Ferrari F355 F1, Ford Mustang Mach-3, Ital Design C2 and Ford Indigo. Each of them naturally feels and looks entirely different, and while initially I remember always going for the fastest with a buddy of mine that I used to race against, eventually when we mastered this we started racing others, just to add the variety to our time attacks. Other than that, 3 new unlockable cars are added too, 1 new track called Last Resort, and 1 new racing style aptly named Wild. Everything else stayed true to the original, so 3 gameplay modes of single player, tournament and knockout, 4 camera options, 3 of which are outer views and 1 from the dashboard, different weather conditions and traffic. At the time of its release, Need for Speed 2 and its SE version were probably the most well-known and popular racing games on PC, and for good reason. They offered unparalleled quality graphics and sounds, true to life at least as much as technology allowed for, models of cars, trucks and trackside objects, and most importantly, were a blast to race. And while Need for Speed 2 SE may not be my favorite entry in the series, that would be the incredible Underground 2, it was still the one I played on PC the most. Nightmare Creatures is a game made solely based on the demonic nature of my boss's wife. She is, after all, what Devil banished to Earth to haunt us until the end of time, as he couldn't stand there in hell with him, being way more evil and mean than he could ever hope to become. And since there can only be one ruler of the underworld, he didn't want to risk losing the position to her. Especially that at the time of her spawning into existence, it was only 2, maybe 3000 years away from the next election for the position of the Lord of Evil. And she is an immortal, immoral and terrible creature of the dark that would outlive the devil with ease. As I'm watching the footage of it now, it becomes painfully obvious that it actually is not a game based on the monstrosity. I have an unpleasantness of being around way more often than I'd like. But a third-person perspective gothic-themed brawler. Oh well. Nightmare Creatures takes place in a Victorian London setting where evil wizard Adam Crowley is summoning all types of ungodly creatures to plunge the city into terror and spread chaos and mayhem everywhere. Naturally, what you'll need to do is go through the creatures to get to Crowley and stop him. And you can play as either Ignatius, a staff-wielding monk, or Natasha, a sword-wielding fighter. They have their own unique gameplay mechanics and fighting styles, and overall feel distinctively different when playing. The enemies are interesting, especially the bosses, and it's pretty fun to mold them down, initially. With time, you begin to realize that they feel very spongy, soaking the damage as if it was nothing, and even though blood splattering from them looks really fun, it only ever does for the first few encounters, and after that you grow increasingly more tired with the amount of work needed to put any of the attackers down. Now, you can use special items when you have them, but when you don't, combat feels very grindy. Not to mention the controls that are a bit floaty and less than stellar camera. But if you don't mind it all, then there's quite a decently looking for the time and playing title that will no doubt keep you engaged for a while. Personally, I feel that Nightmare Creatures really shows its age in gameplay design and don't think that I'll be touching it again. Especially that it keeps reminding me of that terrible, awful woman. KKND Crush Kill and Destroy Xtreme is the same game as basic KKND, but with native Windows support, 20 new missions, 15 multiplayer maps, so-called Chaos Mode, stereo sound and some much needed bug fixes to the original codebase. The end. That's it. That's all I have to say about it, and let's jump into our next game. Nah, I wouldn't do that. Not because I couldn't, because of course I can, but because I fear the wrath of 1,000 angry RTS players that would have with a shroud of a doubt fall upon me in the series of well-put and on-point angry comments that would burn like thousands of consecutive bee stings, all aimed at the same spot. So I'd rather avoid it. The original KKND is the first in the trilogy of post-apocalyptic real-time strategy games. In 2140, after the world has collapsed, 2 remaining factions fight for control of the Earth and its last remaining resources worth anything. Especially, most important of them, oil. They are the survivors, so humans who waited out the destruction underground in relative safety, and the evolved, mutants who survived the catastrophe on the surface. Oil is used as the primary resource to earn the currency required to construct buildings and train units. Interestingly enough, most buildings can be upgraded multiple times to unlock new options within them. Both factions have entirely different sets of units, with survivors utilizing high-tech vehicles of various kinds and evolved mainly using mutated animals. And both of them have their own 15-mission-long campaigns. Gamers and critics alike seem to love KKND when it released, so it not only sold quite well, but also spawned 2 follow-up titles in the coming years. Star Trek Generations is a first-person shooter with some other genres mixed in various amounts for good measure, and all of that based on the same titled 1994 movie. and the events of the game are closely related to those in the motion picture too. Everything naturally takes place in the next generation universe and can see the crew of Enterprise D respond to a distress signal from Amargo's observatory. When there, Commander William T. Riker, also known as Sleazy Riker, upon investigating the incident, meets Dr. Tolian Soran, a scientist genius that's sadly gone mad. And now Soran intends on doing whatever's necessary to return to the so-called Nexus, a paradise dimension. And what is necessary seems to involve destroying various stars, hoping to create a pathway to the dimension. Naturally, since he doesn't know which star will be capable of manifesting such occurrence, he needs to destroy them one by one till he gets to the right one, without any care put to any life on the planets orbiting these stars. Now, learning all that, Enterprise goes on a chase trying to catch Soran before he causes any irreversible damage to the universe. The gameplay is rather non-linear and allows for taking of different paths to complete it. So, you'll spend a lot of time in stellar cartography on Enterprise in strategic mode, trying to figure out where Soran will strike next in order to travel there to stop him. Whenever a crew member, be it Riker, Worf or Kirk, beams to the planet or space station, the game switches into first-person shooter mode that also features some basic adventuring elements. To complete the away mission, you need to find and battle Soran, where usually moments before getting killed, he beams away and escapes. But that particular star in the system is saved in the process, so it's a win, I suppose. Whenever in space, Enterprise can be attacked by enemy ships, and when that happens, the game moves into sort of tactical simulation mode, which is not overly difficult, but a nice refresher to the rest of the title nonetheless. Star Trek Generations mixes many genres with an interesting and captivating story, and some full-motion video sequences to provide a rather fun experience to all fans of the series. So gamers such as myself will love it. Others should give it a go and make their own mind about it, as while it works fine as a combination of many smaller parts, neither of its building blocks is particularly great. Outlaws is a western-themed first-person shooter that takes place in American Old West and is set in and around a small remote town. You play as Marshal James Anderson, ex-fastest gun in the West, ex-Batch, and current landowner and family man. When he refuses to sell to one Bob Graham, Bob hires the toughest and roughest men he can find so that they would use any means necessary to change Anderson's mind. And since these are simple men, the so-called any means to them is always killing. So, when you return home from a trip one day, finding your house aflame, wife killed and daughter kidnapped by Bob's henchmen, you do what any good father would. So, break down internally, gear up like John Wick externally, and head off to save your child and on a mission of bloody revenge, destroying anything and anyone that will stand in your way. And if you think that there's no rough like the one of a mother who lost her child, you'd not seen Marshal Anderson. The man is a maniac. Well, you'll get to control him, so you'll know soon enough. There are no supernatural or sci-fi elements in the game, and it's a simple tale of revenge and thousands of bodies laid to rest for betting on the wrong horse, so to speak. All weapons like revolvers, rifles, dynamite or shotguns to name a few are rather down to earth too, and Outlaws is credited to be one of the very first FPSs to use manual reloading mechanic and sniper zoom. It's also one of the very few games from the 90s that at the highest difficulty level tried to simulate realistic bullet damage, meaning 1, at most 2 hits were enough to kill our protagonist. Presentation-wise, while not real 3D like Quake, Outlaws looks excellent using its engine to the fullest. Engine that for years I thought of as being build engine used in Duke Nukem 3D, when in fact it was LucasArts' own Jedi engine. A very similar in terms of both looks and capabilities perhaps, but a different one nonetheless. Most of the level decorations and buildings look era appropriate, so do the weapons and enemies that you'll face. And the cutscenes are a masterpiece, but I wouldn't expect anything else from LucasArts. Other than the standard single player, Outlaws features also a secondary historical missions mode, which is a series of separate missions depicting James Anderson's rise to the rank of US Marshal. This see you hunting various criminals and preferably, but not necessarily, recover stolen by them gold too. To summarize, Outlaws is one of the best 1990s 2.5D FPSs, if you don't mind the western setting that is. If it's a game breaker for you though, better stick to something else, as in Outlaws it's from when you first run it till the very end. Sega Rally Championship was a gigantic success in the arcades, in which it spawned in 1995. It sported 4 hella fast and beautiful tracks to race on, 3 entirely different cars, and an arcade racing goodness galore, swallowing coins from speed-craving players like a deranged and upright hungry hippo. A hippo that was so heavy it didn't move and relied on coins to be delivered to it. And they were. The game was universally loved, praised for its graphics, sensation of speed and fun factor. It was not realistic, however, but it didn't matter. Its player base wanted frantic action and not complicated mechanics. It was bound to be a huge success on PC then. It was, but it wasn't, if that even makes sense. In 1997, when Sega Rally Championship finally dropped on PC, it was met with a huge range of other arcade racing games. some also in the rally team, others like Need for Speed more focusing on street racing, and likes of Screamer 2, kinda but not really, covering both. And while not much changed for Sega Rally Championship other than the improved effects and in-game music, it proved to be too little too late. Cause while it was still an excellent arcade racer, as compared to the others that were already established, it offered less features, tracks, cars, and was not even as fun or fast. It was just one of the many in the background of few greats. Is it worth playing then? Of course it is. It's still really good, it's just nowhere near the best, that's all. There are possibly 3 or 4, sometimes 5 at most games that define the generation, and first Tomb Raider was just that. A title that changed the gaming landscape forever. I mean, sure, we had some 3D platformers, we had some 3D shooters even, and we definitely had games with female protagonists. Albeit few, and other than Miss Pac-Man, most were rather forgettable. She was a star. No one who met her forgets about Miss Pac-Man. Anyway, we had it all, it seemed, and we couldn't be surprised by anything new or creative. And then came core design, and in pair with IDOS, they released Tomb Raider. And as they did, everything we thought we couldn't do or we didn't need was instantly proved wrong. Lara Croft came into our lives and changed them forever. Not to mention sparking imagination of countless teens with her big-chested figure. Releasing a year later, Tomb Raider 2 was 2 things for me. A surprise that it came out so soon, and a pickle. A mystery to solve, as well being technically same but different. It felt to me as different but the same. I know, no such saying, but I just coined it, so deal with it. What do I mean by that? Well, while the gameplay stayed largely the same, placing our big boob heroine in the center of it all, shooting and platforming her way around enemies and various puzzles, the focus of the game seemed to have changed a little. While the first title was, at least for me, mostly an action-packed game with some puzzling and adventuring elements from here and there to keep it interesting, the second felt as if it was focusing more on adventuring and puzzling and using action sequences just to let you get from one riddle to another. Now, don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying that it was a bad choice, quite the opposite actually, but the shift was more than obvious. And sure, there were technically more combat encounters in the second Tomb Raider than in the first, but they felt more like action sequences in an adventure movie rather than the main part of that movie itself. So, while the format would evolve and in time it would become the new norm for both Tomb Raider and Uncharted, and countless games trying to be either for that matter too, the first attempt felt a bit out of place. That's how I feel though, and you don't have to agree. Anyway, what can I say here that you don't know about it already? It's a super fun title and one definitely worth experiencing, if not for its gameplay, then at least to learn where all these modern hits came from. Oh, and in Tomb Raider 2, Lara is trying to stop Venetian crime lord from obtaining a mythical legendary dagger of Xian that is said to have magical powers, allowing wielder to turn into all-powerful dragon if they pierce their own heart with it. So yeah, there's an adventure and a half awaiting you in this one. Unlike Sega Rally Championship that we've spoke about a couple of minutes ago, Virtua Cop that also originated in the arcades, when it landed on PC, it was a de facto the best game of its kind. So, on-rail mouse-driven arcade shooter. Sure, it had competitors eagerly awaiting its arrival too, imitating its gameplay formula. Some better and some worse. But neither reached the similar polish and quality heights. Now, I'm not a silly goose, silly potato perhaps, but not a goose. And I know that it was just for a little while, and it was bested in time. In fact, its second part dropped on PC the very same year, and it was a much better game. But it didn't change anything then and there, when Virtua Cop appeared on our great boxes, it was the best. Sure, it's from the arcade's design has similar issues to Sega Rally, meaning it was made to chew coins at a machine gun speed, which meant that it was challenging but featured a very small selection of stages. 3, to be precise. And while in the arcades where the difficulties ramped up to the max and every attempt costs money, it took way longer to go through it all, at home, when you paid nothing for playing, well, other than the initial purchase price that is, it was completed and mastered by most in no time. And the 3 levels proved to be a very limiting amount of content for the in-home gamer. Now, I don't want to say that 1997 was the year, cause that's clearly not the case. I'd say it started earlier with the release of original PlayStation, but mid-90s were the time when the arcades started dying off and the coin-munching game design began fading away. On a side note, we're in the microtransaction era now and it equally as sucks. But I digress. What I really wanna say here is that Virtua Cop is good, but too short to pay the full price for. And it was like that even in 1997, despite being the best title in its very specific genre. Story-wise, you're playing as one of 2 cops, or 2 of them if you have a friend with you, and you're on a super secret, totally not sanctioned by the higher-ups mission of bringing down an evil crime syndicate. As you go through what feels like thousands of bodies, you get to find and use better weapons and even fight some end-level bosses. Sounds like fun? Good, cause it is. It's also short, so definitely try it out, but don't go out of your way spending a lot on it. Does 1997 still feel like a year of hits? It does to me, and I have a lot more still waiting to be covered. Is it possible that it was a single best year for early Windows gaming? Let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. Smash them if you have to, it helps more than you could ever know. Also, I would like to thank you and all my amazing Patreon and YouTube members for helping this channel keep going. And last but definitely not least, I would like to thank all the wonderful folks who record and upload playthroughs, let's plays and other retro-centric videos here on YouTube, because they help to preserve the games that would have otherwise belonged forgotten. So thank you.